Wretchlings, I am but a simple man. I'm just like everyone else. I look up to other men who aura farm nonchalantly. I said it. I'm sorry, okay? I gotta come clean. I want that to be me. I want to be the aura farm nonchalant guy, and that's a part of the reason why it just never will be me. You guys seen The Dark Knight 2008, where Bruce Wayne goes...
Famous Bruce Wayne. Rachel's told me everything about you.
I certainly hope not. So let's put a couple tables together.
I'm not sure that they'll let us.
Oh, they should. I own the place.
My God, bro. I want to be Bruce Wayne so bad, bro. Is that too much to ask? I mean, those TikTok edits are doing a number on me. I'm just being real. I'm just being honest. I recently watched Berserk. I need to be guts, minus the last 2 episodes. And now listen, I don't think I'm special. I'm sure most men are this way. You know, we're just the Buzz Lightyears in the aisle. And I mean, I think that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But then I got to thinking, who are the Sigma males of the Counter-Strike scene? Who are the Bruce Waynes in the guts from Berserk? You know, we have some people that try.
You guys hear me? Yo, hello. You hear me, yeah? You hear me. You guys...
And I'll be honest, it doesn't go very well. So I ended up coming to this conclusion. In my brain, the Sigma, nonchalant, aura masters of the scene are the people who, when the pressure is the highest, when they get to the big stage in front of thousands and thousands of people, they don't crumble, they get better and play out of their goddamn minds. Today, we will be going all the way back to 2013, the first full year of Counter-Strike Global Offensive, to see which player's form goes up the most from their pre-playoff stats to their playoff stats in big events. I think this makes more sense than just seeing who has the best playoff stats, because I want to see the jump, okay? I gotta split it up into 2 groups. I gotta see who jumps the most into just pre-playoff stats into playoff stats. Also, thank you Statsmeister on Twitter for giving me this idea in the first place. How I'm gonna format this video is I'm gonna go year by year, because I just want to see, you know, who are some of the players that are the biggest playoff risers throughout the years. And then I will take into account every single year in CSGO and CS2 history and see who the biggest playoff riser in Counter-Strike history is. And let me tell you what, fellas, it is not who you expect. The player who is the biggest playoff riser shocked me, honestly. Armlings? Do you see that over there? Bro, what is that? It's been staring at me for hours. Ah! Oh, no worries. It's just that new knife that I bought from today's sponsor, Skins Monkey. Skins Monkey is an instant trading site with an incredibly large selection of skins, low commission, and an easy search filter system. Buying or trading your skins has never been easier. And if you use my link today, you can get up to $5 completely free. They also have daily, weekly, and monthly giveaways on their freebies tab, along with a 35% deposit bonus if you use code Garmour. If you want to check out Skins Monkey, scan the QR code or hit the link below. Thank you to them for sponsoring, and back to the video. To start us off, we have 2013, and this year, since it was still early in Global Offense's history, there was really only one big event, and that was DreamHack Winter, the first ever major. The first thing you'll notice is, of course, nearly every single player's rating goes down once they reach the playoffs. And well, especially with DreamHack Winter, the group was incredibly short, with the absolute most maps you could play being 3. So, I mean, with less maps, it is a lot easier to farm a higher rating, along with less pressure and playing worse teams. Like, no shit, your rating in the group stage is going to be higher. But that's why this is so interesting to me. I need to know who these demons are that go up in rating when everything is harder, there's more fans, and more pressure. So, the playoff risers in 2013 look like this. Forest in the group stage went from a 104 to a 115, going up plus 0.11. Then there's Freiburg, who went up from a 1.00 rating in the groups to a 1.12 in the playoffs. Then an interesting case where 2 people are tied, just because they played so badly in the groups and played like still pretty bad but better in the playoffs. And that's Scream, who went from a 0.84 in the groups to a 0.97, going up 0.13. And Pronax, the IGL of Fnatic, who went up from 0.8 to 0.93, also having a plus 0.13 rating going into the playoffs. Significantly above those two, we have an NA legend who kind of did the same thing as Scream and Pronax, to be honest. He had a horrible group stage and just played fine in the playoffs, but it was enough. And that's Swag, who had a 0.77 in the groups and went up to a 0.98 in the playoffs, going up plus 0.21. You know, it's not like that impressive, but he did go up you know, 0.21. It is what it is. But by far, the most impressive playoff riser from this first ever major was Smiths. Smiths gets shit on a lot for being, you know, not great for a lot of his time in CSGO. But during the early days, he was kind of a beast. And at this major in the groups, he went from a 0.94 to a 1.20 in the playoffs, going up plus 0.26 in rating. And this is, of course, the most impressive because it's not like he played horrifically in the groups and then just played fine in the playoffs. He went from playing meh in the groups to being incredibly good in the playoffs. And I think, you know, that's worth a little bit of glaze. Now, I do also want to state that technically there was another big event in 2013, but I personally decided this event was evil. The prize pool was $42,314 exactly. I'm just gonna include the major this year. And if you guys did want to know, after Fnatic ended up winning this tournament and JW would be the MVP, if you want to know what JW did, he was a playoff faller. He was still very good, but he did fall off slightly, going from a 1.35 in the groups to a 1.24 in the playoffs. So his change was negative 0.11 in rating, which he was still incredible. Okay, he still had a 1.24 in the playoffs. It's kind of one of those cases where he was suffering from success. The big events in 2014 were just the three majors: EMS won Katowice 2014, ESL won Cologne 2014, and DreamHack Winter 2014. Of course, the winners of these three tournaments was VP, NIP, and LDLC. So you might expect, you know, players from VP, NIP, and LDLC to mostly be on this list, and for one of them to be the best playoff riser of 2014, but the best one wasn't any of them, but we'll get to them in a second. For starters, we have Edward from Na'Vi, who in the groups had a 1.09 and ended up going to a 1.18 in the playoffs, going up 0.09. After him, we have Zeus, who had a 0.91 in the groups and went up to a 102 in the playoffs, going up 0.11. And tied with him, we have Swag, who once again makes this list. But this time, Swag's numbers were a little more impressive, as he had a 1.17 in 2024 big event groups and went up to a 1.28 in the playoffs, going up 0.11 as well. Right above them, we have NBK, who had a 0.91 in the groups and went up to a 103 in the playoffs, going up 0.12. And along with NBK, we have Speedy, who made the playoffs of DreamHack Winter 2014 with German team Penta, and in the groups he had a 0.98 rating, and in the playoffs he went up to a 1.1, which is a rise of 0.12 rating. Two players as well who both went up 0.1 that I forgot to mention was Seized from Na'Vi, who went from a 0.91 in the groups to a 101 in the playoffs, and an incredibly impressive 1.2 rating in the groups from Schneider, but he did even better in big event playoffs this year with a 1.3 rating. I think Schneider might be the most impressive on this entire list if it wasn't for one other man by a country fucking mile. The biggest playoff riser of 2014 is Shroud. In 2014, in big event group stages, Shroud posted a 0.83 rating. That is horrific. But in the playoffs, he went up to a 1.19, which means Shroud's playoff riser HLTV rating is plus 0.36. Easily the most we've had on this entire list so far. Now, if you're wondering how this exactly happened, Cloud9 made the playoffs of ESL 1 Cologne 2014, but in the groups of ESL 1 Cologne 2014, he was abysmal with a 0.8 rating. Cloud9 played Titan and they played Dignitas, and they went into double overtime versus Titan and they win 22-18, where Shroud goes 30-31 and drops a 0.96. That's really, you know, not horrible. That's fine. But then Cloud9 also go on to beat Dignitas 16-14, where Shroud goes 13-25 and posts a 0.59 rating. The fact that Cloud9 even won that map against Dignitas with a performance like that is very impressive. But then in the playoffs of this event, Cloud9 would play NIP, who went on to win this entire thing. This series was incredibly close, as Cloud9 won map 1 16-8, and then lost the last two maps 14-16. But in every single one of these maps, Shroud played very well, dropping a 1.23 rating on Nuke, a 1.25 rating on Dust 2, and a 1.09 on Cobble, which gives him a total of a 1.19 rating in these playoffs. Now, this was the only playoffs that Cloud9 participated in this year, and after this at DreamHack Winter 2014, Shroud would not help his pre-playoff rating, as Cloud9 would place 9th to 12th, and Shroud would drop a 0.86. When going into 2015, we start getting a bigger sample size as more events were considered big events. Instead of it just being 3 majors, we now have 7 different events that are under this category, most of which this year were won by Fnatic. And with this bigger sample size, I kind of had to split players into 2 groups. Players that had at least 10 maps minimum in playoffs and players who had less, because I feel like it's kind of unfair when a lot of these players who have only played, 3, 4, 5 maps in playoffs with that smaller sample size, it's going to be a lot easier to farm a higher rating if you play well, in one series. So for the list of players who had less than 10 maps, we start with Jacob, who went from a 107 to a 117 in the playoffs. Then Shox, who went from a 0.99 to a 1.10. Skadoodle, who went from a 102 to a 114. Dennis, who went from a 0.89 to a 102. FNX, who went from a 0.94 to a 108. 2 players who went up by 0.16 in Tarek and FNS. FNS went from a 0.85 to a 101, and Tarek from a 0.99 to a 1.15. And of course, leading this group of players is 2 names that we have already talked about. First is Shroud, once again, who went from a 0.97 in groups this year to a 1.15 in the playoffs, going up 0.18. But above him, we have Smiths, who went from a 0.85 to a 106, going up 0.21. You can decide for yourself which one of these 2 players is more impressive. Smith's group rating was much worse, and he just kind of played slightly above average with a 106 in the playoffs. But I mean, it was a bigger jump than Shroud's was, even if Shroud's playoff rating was a little better. So I think for this year, the winner is going to be Smiths. But if we go to the 10 maps minimum in playoffs, the gaps that people jump become a hell of a lot smaller. Less than 10 maps, you got people going up by 0.10 minimum, and the highest playoff jumper we had with the 10 maps minimum is 0.04, and 2 players tied for it. It was Get Right and Kiyoshima. Get Right's ratings were just higher overall, so I'm going to give the one where they have at least 10 maps minimum to Get Right. So less than 10 maps, Smiths wins. More than 10 maps, Get Right wins. You can, whichever one you care about more. In 2016, we have even more big events, so the players that don't have at least 10 maps are very, very small. And I'll just get them right out of the way off the bat. The 3 players in this list who don't have at least 10 maps is Henny, Lekro, and Adren. Henny went from a 104 to a 118 in 5 maps in the playoffs, going up 0.14. Adren went from a 0.91 to a 1.05 in 4 playoff maps, which is a plus 0.14. And Lekra went from a 102 to a 1.12 in 9 maps, which is a plus 0.10. Then we get to the players who had at least 10 maps. And to start us off, we have Olaf, who went from a 112 in the group stage to a 119 in the playoffs. Simple, who went from a 112 in the groups to a 120 in the playoffs. Michael Lele, who went from a 0.96 to a 106 in the playoffs. Automatic, who went from a 111 in the groups to a 1.22 in the playoffs. And once again on this list, we have Shroud, who went from a 103 in the groups to a 118 in the playoffs this year for Cloud9, going up plus 0.15. And the winner of 2016 is Rush, who went from a 104 in the groups to a 1.26 in the playoffs. That is a playoff riser of plus 0.22 rating. In 2016 group stages on Optic, Rush only posted a 1.04, like I said, and this was at 7 events: ESL Pro League Season 3 Finals, E-League Season 1, ESL 1 Cologne 2016, ESL 1 New York 2016, E-League Season 2 where he won, ESL Pro League Season 4 Finals, and ECS Season 2 Finals, with his worst group stage rating here being a 0.78. On Optic, he made the playoffs at 3 of these events: E-League Season 2, ESL Pro League Season 4 Finals, and ECS Season 2 Finals. When Optic won E-League Season 2, he posted a 1.4 rating in the playoffs. When they came in 5th to 6th at ESL Pro League Season 4 Finals, he posted a 0.97. And then when Optic made the finals but lost at ECS Season 2 Finals, he posted a 1.17. So a lot of this does rest on the back of an E-League Season 2 generational playoff performance, but for the most part in 2016, Rush was just very good in playoffs. In 2017, there was 17 big events, which means that pretty much everyone on this list is going to have at least 10 maps again. But there is one player who didn't meet this threshold that I wanted to shout out, and that's Bondic, who had a 0.77 rating in groups, but went up to a 104 in the playoffs, going up plus 0.27. Good work, Bondic. But then players this year who were actually playoff risers is, it's not very much. The list is very short. At least ones that went up by a decent amount. There might have been some that were like below 0.06. But for players who were above a 0.06 playoff riser, there is only 5. The first is Rain, who went from a 113 in groups to a 1.2 in playoffs. KNG, who went from a 1.00 to a 1.15 in playoffs. Bialy from VP, who went from a 0.95 to a 1.10 in playoffs. Once again on this list, we have Shroud. Holy fuck. Is Shroud maybe the most overrated player in Counter-Strike history? You know, potentially yes, but Buddy has shown up nearly every single year he played as a playoff riser, and a significant one at that. In 2017, Shroud had a 0.91 in groups and a 103 in playoffs, going up plus 0.12. But in the lead, we have the 1.6 GOAT in Neo, who went from a 0.91 in groups with VP to a 1.09 in the playoffs, going up plus 0.18. Neo is easily the winner of 2017. The list in 2018 is pretty short of people who drastically rose and formed in the playoffs. There's only 2 players who had at least 10 maps and went up by at least a 0.10. But there are 2 people that I want to mention who didn't have at least 10 maps that I think are very interesting. The first is Kickert, who went up 0.13. He had a 0.95 in the groups and a 1.08 in the playoffs. But even though he didn't have 10 maps, by far the biggest playoff riser of 2018 was Jame, the fucking GOAT. I knew Jame was going to show up in some capacity on one of these lists. In group stages in 2018, Jame had a 1.01 and in playoffs a 1.24, going up plus 0.23. Then for players with at least 10 maps, we have Skadoodle, who went from a 0.96 in groups to a 1.06 in playoffs, going up plus 0.10. But the winner of 2018 for players who had at least 10 maps is Flusha. Flusha had a 1.00 in group stages this year, but went up to a 1.16 in the playoffs. 2018 was an incredibly weird year for Flusha, as he started the year out pretty strong in group stages. At the E-League Major 2018 with Fnatic, he had a 1.22, follows that up with a 101, a 1.28 where they win IEM Katowice 2018, a 1.12, but after those 4 good tournaments to start the year, he kind of has a slump where he posts a 0.94, a 0.84, a 0.9, a 1.00, a 1.06, and a 0.82 with Fnatic. And after Fnatic missed the playoffs of the Faceit Major in 2018, he would leave and join Cloud9, where on Cloud9, in group stages, he posted a 0.89, a 1.04, a 0.95, and a 108. And well, he didn't make any playoffs with this scuffed-ass Cloud9 team, of course, but he did make 5 with Fnatic, where he was very good. At the E-League Major, he posted a 104. At IEM Katowice, he posted a 1.35 in the playoffs. Then he posted a 1.00 in the playoffs, followed by a 113 and a 109. So this is kind of a weird year for Flusha. Like I said, he did start the year very strong, fell off, eventually joined Cloud9, but for the most part, he was not slumped in the playoffs of these events. In 2019, there were 22 big events. I'm going to do it again. Most of the players on this list do have at least 10 playoff maps, but there is 2 that don't that I need to mention. It's 2 players from Jame's team once again, and one of them is Jame. In 2019, Jame had a 103 in the groups and a 1.22 in the playoffs, going up by plus 0.19. Behind him is Buster, who had a 101 in groups and a 1.13 in playoffs, going up plus 0.12. I had to shout out Jame again, okay, because his playoff risers, even though he didn't have that many maps over the past 2 years, have been kind of astronomical. Now for players with at least 10 playoff maps, and not a single person went up by plus 0.10 this year, but there were still quite a few decent playoff risers. To start, we have ZywOo, and I had to include ZywOo because his group stage rating this year is a 1.3. You might be thinking it's impossible to even rise in the playoffs after dropping a 1.3 in groups, but he did. Not by a ton, but he did. He had a 1.33 in playoffs, going up by plus 0.03. Then after him, we have Breeze, who went from a 1.12 in the groups to a 118 in the playoffs. Edward, who went from a 104 to a 111 in the playoffs. Fur, who went from a 106 to a 1.14 in the playoffs. And the player who was the biggest playoff riser of 2019 with at least 10 playoff maps was JK JKS. JKS had a 1.10 in group stages and went up to a 1.19 in playoffs, giving him a plus 0.09 rating increase in playoffs. 2019 was the breakout year for JKS and Renegades, and for the most part in group stages, JKS was very good. Like a 1.1 is nothing to scoff at. He was positive in like every single group stage besides 2 events this entire year. One being IEM Sydney, where he posted a 0.89, and one being ESL Pro League Season 10 Finals, where he posted a 0.86. But somehow he just simply got better in the playoffs. He ended up making 4 with Renegades and 1 with 100 Thieves, where he posted a 0.97 at IEM Katowice 2019, a 1.28 at Star Series I-League Season 7, a 1.35 in the playoffs of the Star Ladder Major Berlin 2019, a 1.03 at Star Series I-League Season 8, and a 1.27 in the playoffs of IEM Beijing 2019. So after playing well all year in group stages, he somehow just became an absolute demon more often than not in the playoffs. 2020 is weird because it was a COVID year, and well, Na'Vi was pretty dominant during this COVID year. So as you would expect, most of the players on this list are from Na'Vi. Flamey went from a 0.99 in groups to a 1.22 in playoffs. Electronic went from a 105 in groups to a 1.25 in playoffs. But the biggest riser this entire year was Simple, who had a 1.24 in groups and a 1.51 in playoffs this year. He went up a plus 0.27 in 2020. I know it was mostly online. It was a strange year, but somehow going up plus 0.27 after already posting a 1.24 in the groups is unbelievable. JKS was also great this year. He had a 110 in groups and went up to a 1.35 in playoffs, being right behind Simple's 0.27 with a 0.25. And Elige was also here. He went from a 1.15 in group stages to a 1.32 in playoffs. So yeah, I thought I'd mention 2020 even though it was weird, but yeah, Simple was insane. JKS was still an incredibly good playoff riser. And that kind of leads us to 2021, where 2021 was also a kind of a strange year, but we'll still talk about it slightly. Simple once again went up. He had a 1.39 in group stages and went to a 1.53 in playoffs. So I mean, realistically, Simple was better in group stages and playoffs this year. The gap just isn't as wide. This year he only went up by plus 0.14. There's also players like Glaive, who went up from 0.93 in the groups to a 106 in the playoffs. Bubsky, who went from a 0.95 in groups to a 109 in the playoffs. Phelps, who went from a 103 to a 114. And Elige, who went from a 101 to a 1.14. But the winner of 2021 is Config. Config had a 103 in groups and went up to a 1.25 in playoffs, making him the biggest playoff riser with a plus 0.22. All right, now that we're done with the 2 weird years, we can get back to real stuff again. The big events in 2022 were drastically cut down, as you know, it was kind of after all of COVID, it was still a mess slightly. We only had 10 big events this year, so it was a little bit harder to find players that had at least 10 playoff maps. 2 players I want to mention that didn't have at least 10 playoff maps are Fame and Chopper. Chopper went from a 0.94 in group stages to a 109 in the playoffs, but he only had 6 maps. And Fame went from a 104 to a 1.22 with a plus 0.18, but he only had 9 maps. And while there's only 3 players on this list that had at least 10 playoff maps, the first is Yabby, who went from a 0.97 to a 105. Deaths, who went from a 0.90 to a 1.03. But the winner of 2022 is Flit from Outsiders. Flit went from a 106 in group stages to a 1.24 in playoffs, going up the same as Fame, but he did have 2 more playoff maps, so you know, it is what it is, and he had a higher rating in the playoffs. So the winner of 2022 is Flit. Flit was pretty good in the group stages of 2022, but not like anything crazy. He had a 1.1, a 1.11, a 0.9, a 0.7, a 1.2, a 1.11, and a 0.98. And while, to be honest with you, he also wasn't that insane in the playoffs of most of these events. In the playoffs of IEM Katowice, he only had a 108. At ESL Pro League Season 16, he had a 1.09. But where he really shined in 2022 was the IEM Rio Major, where Outsiders won. And in the playoffs here, he had a 1.37. And yeah, I mean, that event really carries him this year, to be honest with you. 2023 had more big events than 2022 at a total of 12 instead of 10, but it still was a very weird year because we transitioned from CSGO into CS2. Even with this, I will still mention some players. This was really where complexity locked the fuck in, okay? I'm just gonna be honest. 3 out of the 4 players here are from complexity. JT went from a 0.87 to a 105, going up plus 0.18. Elige went from a 104 to a 1.22, going up plus 0.18. And the winner of 2023 is simply Floppy. Floppy went from a 103 in groups to a 1.23 in playoffs, going up plus 0.20. There was also Rops here from FaZe, who had a 1.13 in groups and a 1.22 in playoffs. But yeah, 2023 is kind of a strange year. Complexity, where just everyone on the team was playoff risers, I guess. Complexity participated in 5 big events in CSGO and then 2 big events in CS2. And in the groups of all these events, Floppy wasn't great. Like I said, he had a 1.03 rating only. But in the playoffs, he was a freak, especially at IEM Sydney, where Complexity did make the finals, losing to FaZe. And in those playoffs, he had a 1.3 rating. And then after that, at Blast Premier Fall 2023, he had a 1.18 rating. The only tournament they made the playoffs in CSGO was Blast Premier Spring Final 2023, where he posted a 106 in the playoffs. So he pretty much was just farming playoffs in CS2, and that's really why he has this incredibly big gap. 2024 was the first full year of CS2, and there are only 2 playoff risers on this list with at least 10 maps. The first of which is Woxic with a 104 in group stages. He goes up to a 1.11 in playoffs, going up plus 0.07. But above him is JL, who had a 109 in groups this year and a 118 in playoffs, going up plus 0.09. Yeah, 2024 was a generational year for Navi and JL. He completely broke out this year, and a part of the reason was, JL kind of was a big game player this year, man. Now, he wasn't bad by any means in group stages. He had a lot of tournaments where he posted a 1.35 rating. Well, by a lot, I mean 2. But for this entire year, he only had 3 tournaments where he went negative in the group stage. And that was IEM Dallas, Blast Premier World Final, and the Perfect World Shanghai Major. But he just simply got better in the playoffs. And this all started with the PGL CS2 Copenhagen Major, where he posted a 1.27 rating in the playoffs, won the whole goddamn thing, and won the MVP. This leads us to this year, well, I guess last year, in 2025, where there's a lot of interesting names on this list. I'm going to go through it quick because I'm getting antsy to get to who the biggest playoff riser of all time is. But there was Twist, who had a 114 in group stages and went up to a 1.22 in playoffs. Sunpius, who went from a 0.99 in groups to a 1.12 in playoffs. Stare, who went from a 102 in groups to a 1.15 in playoffs. Naf, who went from a 0.89 in groups to a 1.03 in playoffs. Dexter, who went from a 0.98 to a 1.14 in playoffs. But the winner of 2025, the biggest playoff riser, I made a whole video dedicated to him. The most underrated player of 2025 is, of course, Makaze. Makaze went from a 103 in group stages to a 1.22 in playoffs, going up plus 0.19. I'm going to be honest, fellas, there might have not been a better replacement for JL, because if JL had the big game gene, he played better in playoffs. That same exact thing seems to be true with Makaze. They traded out a big game player for a big game player. Now, Makaze isn't nearly the big game player that JL proved to be. You know, Makaze hasn't won a major MVP, but, you know, maybe 2026 is his year. Who's to say? Probably not, but, you know, we can pretend like he's as good of a big game player as JL. After yapping about every single year individually, this brings us to the all-time playoff risers. Throughout CSGO and CS2's history, I decided to look at all of these and only track players whose ratings in playoffs was positive. You know, I don't want to really count someone that goes from a 0.7 in group stages to a 0.85 in playoffs. Like, oh boy. So in Global Offensive and CS2's history, there is only 6 total players who had a positive playoff rating and went up from their group stage rating. The first of which is Fame. Fame has a 0.97 in the group stages in his career and goes up to a 101 in the playoffs, going up plus 0.04. Right above him is Sunpius, who goes from a 107 in group stages to a 112 in the playoffs of his career in big events. Right above him is Breeze, who goes from a 104 in group stages to a 1.10 in playoffs. That's an improvement of plus 0.06. Right above him is Stare, who has a 0.95 in group stages, and he goes up to a 102 in playoffs. And one of 2 players in Counter-Strike's history to go up by at least plus 0.10 is Henny. Henny has a 1.00 rating in group stages and a 1.10 in playoffs. But by far, the biggest playoff riser in Counter-Strike's history is Shroud. In Shroud's entire career, he has a 0.93 in group stages, and he goes up to a 1.12 in playoffs. This means Shroud goes up by plus 0.19 in total throughout his career from group stages to playoffs. This is an unreal jump, and it shocked me that Shroud is the biggest playoff riser in Counter-Strike's history. At first, I thought this was going to be a fluke when he showed up in 2014, because it was like he played really bad at one major. He played really bad in the groups of the other major and just had one good series in the playoffs. But consistently, year after year after year, Shroud would go up in form when he hit the playoffs. In 2014, he went up by plus 0.36. In 2015, he went up by plus 0.18. In 2016, he went up by plus 0.15. And in 2017, he went up by plus 0.12. Pretty much every single year of his professional career on Cloud9, he went up in form when they hit the playoffs. So, you know, maybe a little bit too harsh on Shroud. What does this mean? Does this mean Shroud isn't the most overrated player in Counter-Strike history? He probably still is, okay? You know, when he's getting compared to Simple, that's a little extreme. He probably still isn't a top 5 NA player of all time. But hey, man, at the end of the day, Shroud was simply a big game player by the looks of it. And when you look at every single playoffs he's ever played in at big events, he only went negative once, and that was at ECS Season 3 Finals where he posted a 0.95. Other than that, I'm looking at straight green right now. There's no red besides 1. So congratulations, Shroud. I guess you are the Sigma male of the Counter-Strike scene. You are the biggest playoff riser in Counter-Strike's history. Anyways, that's it for me today, fellas. I did hope you enjoyed. I still can't believe it was Shroud. He is one of the last few people I expected. But if you did enjoy, subscribing, liking the video, and hit that notification bell if you want notifications. And I will see you guys later.